Rumpole and the old story. Those of you who may have followed these memoirs, which I have scribbled down from time to time in the privacy of my chambers during temporary lulls in business, will know that sometimes there's a bit of an east wind blowing around our homestead in Froxbury Court. Sometimes, in fact, the icy winds of Hilda's discontent could best be described as a blizzard. And then, if I can't organize a case in a distant town, I leave almost at dawn to breakfast in the Tasty Bite in Fleet Street, and return as late as possible after a spot of bottled courage in Jack Pomeroy's wine bar, although this last expedient never seems to do much to warm up the domestic hearth. Usually these moments of high drama subside. She who must be obeyed gives a few brief words of command, all hands snap to it, and the Rumpole marriage sails for a while into somewhat calmer waters. There was a time, however, not too long ago at that, when the old tramp steamer, with its heavy load of memories in my various delinquencies and its salt-stained smokestack, seemed to be heading for the rocks. My wife, Hilda, and I actually came on one occasion to the parting of the ways. I cannot decide whether to look back at the dramatic period of my life with nostalgia or regret. I can tell you that it came when I was most intellectually stretched, grappling as I was with one of my most important cases, the curious affair of the alleged attempted murder of Captain Arnold Gleason at the Woodland Folk Garden Centre. And, lest you should suspect the presence of some other woman in the case, let me say at once that I have no reputation as a Lothario, that Ms. Liz Probert, about whom my wife's best friend Dodo Mackintosh nursed some unworthy suspicions, had not yet appeared at our chambers, and neither of the two ladies for whom I have in the past entertained some tender feelings, that is to say, Bobby O'Keefe, once of the Woman's Auxiliary Air Force, and a young woman named Cathy Trelawney, whom I defended on a drugs charge, had anything to do with the case. Hilda and I, in fact, severed relations as the direct result of a joke. We are not great diners out. By the time I get home from Pomeroy's and remove the winged collar and put on the carpet slippers preparatory to an evening's work on robbery or sudden death, a scrambled egg, or at best a grilled chop, is about all we run to. On the night in question, however, Marigold Featherstone, wife of our old head of chambers, Sir Guthrie Featherstone, now translated to the bench, an ermine and scarlet-clad figure who had everything it takes to be a justice of the Queen's Bench Division, except for the slightest talent of making up his mind, had given us a couple of tickets they couldn't use for the Scales of Justice annual dinner at the Savoy. Gatherings of lawyers at the Trough are usually to be avoided like the plague, but Hilda was dead set on being among those present on this occasion, and in view of the opportunity offered of hacking away at the Savoy Hotel Claret, I didn't oppose her wishes too strenuously. So, she got my old soup and fish out of mothballs, cleaned the stains off the jacket with some pungent chemical, renewed a few essential buttons on the dress trousers, and we found ourselves ensconced at a table presided over by another scarlet judge, this time of a somewhat malign and Welsh variety, known as Mr. Justice Hugh Gwent Evans, together with his spouse Lady Gwent Evans. Claude Urskin Brown and his better half, Phillida Urskin Brown, née Trant, the Portia of our chambers, mixed with an assortment of younger barristers with their wives or live-in companions. As dinner drew to an end, I discovered that my glass had been refilled at such regular intervals that I was seeing the whole proceedings lit by a kind of golden glow. I also saw, somewhat to my surprise, that she who must be obeyed was in animated conversation with the Welsh judge, who was regarding her with admiration, his small eyes bright with enjoyment at her lengthy reminiscences of life in the distant days when her daddy, C.H. Whiston, ruled our chambers at Equity Court. At long length the proceedings wound to an end, and Mr. Justice Gwent Evans pulled out his gold repeater and said, with every appearance of disappointment, "Good heavens, is that the time? I hate to break up such an extraordinarily enjoyable evening, but the learned judge is looking at the time." My voice sounded from where I sat pleasantly resonant. I had the cue for one of my best stories, one which has never failed in my long experience to set the table on a roar. I well remember when old Judge Quentin Starkey in a London sessions looked at the time. It was during an indecent assault. This sort of thing that always went on in cinemas round Bethnal Green. This girl was giving evidence. I was conscious of not playing to a particularly good audience. Indeed, Lady Gwent Evans appeared to dread the outcome of the anecdote. Urskin Brown stifled a yawn. Phillida looked at me tolerantly, although I knew that the outcome of the story would be no surprise to her. Hilda was stony-faced, and the judge cleared his throat in a warning manner. In spite of all discouragement, I carried on, giving my well-known imitation of the witness's fluting tones. "So he put his hand up my skirt, my lord. This bloke sitting beside me in the 1-9s. Now I mimicked old Judge Starkey's low growl. "Put his hand up your skirt, did he?" And then his honour looks at the clock and finds us dead on lunchtime. "Put his hand up your skirt? Well, I suggest we leave it there until 2:10. One of the wives laughed loudly. The other young barristers seemed more moderately amused. Phillida did her best, and there was a weary titter from Claude, but no smiles from the judge's wife or Hilda. The Welsh wizard looked as though he had just witnessed an act of adultery in chapel. Urskin Brown broke the ensuing silence with a somewhat pointless remark. They don't have them nowadays." "Indecent assaults in flick houses? Of course they do. Why, only the other day at Uxbridge." No, I mean the 1 and 9 pennies. "Oh, perhaps you're right. Let's say it's a joke from my distant past. Not a bad story, though, eh? Whenever it happened." The judge rose to his feet in determined manner and asked his wife if she were ready to go. She told him that she'd been ready for some time. "Delighted to meet you, Mrs. Rumpole." "Quite delightful," the judge said before he left us. "I do hope we meet again soon." I noticed that I was not included in his eager anticipation of any future get-together. "Telling that disgusting story about the girl at the Odeon." Hilda sat in the taxi travelling down the Mall, leaving as much unoccupied seat between us as possible. The temperature had dropped to a point at which your fingers would fall off if you stayed out in it too long. "It wasn't the Odeon," I ventured to correct her. "It was the Regal Cinema, Bethnal Green." "And you told it for the 100th time. You must be getting senile." "Oh, old jokes are always welcome. Like old poetry, old wine, old—" But she interrupted my speech. "The judge didn't know where to look." "Mr. Justice Gwent Evans bores for Wales," I told her. "A man with about as many laughs in him as a post-mortem. He was a perfect gentleman, which is more than can be said for you, Rumpole. Fancy telling a blue joke with the judge's wife sitting right beside you." "It was the Savoy Hotel, Hilda, not the chapel in the valley." And at this point our taxi rattled to a halt by a traffic light. "Wherever it was, you made a fine fool of yourself tonight, Rumpole." And then, I suppose, something snapped, and the habit of years was broken. I knew it as I opened the taxi door, and felt, as I stepped out into the night, like the Count of Monte Cristo when he made his final and perilous escape from the Chateau d'If. I had at last found freedom. The world was in front of me. Behind me was Hilda's voice saying, "What on earth are you doing, Rumpole?" "Saying goodbye," I told her, as I walked on across St. James's Park, and never for one moment turned back. The reader will, no doubt, be relieved to turn from the painful and somewhat sordid world of married life to the more salubrious atmosphere of crime and criminals. Captain Arnold Gleason, ex-soldier and ex-golf club secretary, had become a partner in the Woodland Folk Garden Centre just outside the large country town of Worsfield, some 50 miles to the west of London. Although he was a man in his 60s, with a prominent stomach and little hair, Captain Gleason must have had some charm, for he had married Amanda Gleason, a red-haired beauty, some 30 years his junior. He also had a partner, a handsome and youngish member of the Council for the Preservation of Rural England, the Friends of the Earth, and such-like organizations dedicated to the saving of hedgerows and protection of the badger, with a name like the hero of a Victorian novelette, Hugo Lutterworth. And when I tell you that from time to time Mr. Lutterworth and Mrs. Gleason were seen kissing in the greenhouses, you will readily understand that the scene at the Woodland Folk Garden Centre was set for a triangular drama and a nasty accident. The accident came about when Captain Gleason got into his Volvo estate car to leave the garden centre. He drove carefully, as was apparently his practice, out of the garden gates and started down a steepish hill which led to a junction with the main road to Worsfield. As the car descended, it became out of control, as the braking system had clearly failed. With considerable presence of mind, the captain steered into an area halfway down the hill used by the garden centre for assorted statues. He crashed into a sundial, ricocheted off a couple of hairy cherubs, and finally came to rest among the gnomes. Captain Gleason mercifully escaped with nothing more than a mild concussion, a cut forehead, a number of bruises, and a considerably battered Volvo estate. Subsequent inquiries by the industrious Detective Inspector Rolfe of the Worsfield Police Force led to the arrest of young Hugo Lutterworth on a charge of attempted murder. Lutterworth had one small piece of luck. His solicitor, a grey-haired and generally harmless Mr. Dennis Driscoll, knew absolutely nothing about crime. He had, however, met Mr. Bernard, one of my regular customers, and the long-time representative of the Timpson family, over a matter of conveyancing. They struck up a friendship, and when Mr. Driscoll happened to mention that he had an attempted murder on his hands, Bernard wisely replied, "Then Rumpole's your man," or uttered words to the like effect. I suppose if Captain Gleason had crashed into a lorry on the main road and thereby met his end, there would have been talk of taking in some querulous Q.C., some artificial silk to lead me. And this, despite the success I scored some years ago now in the Penge bungalow murders, alone and without a leader. But as it was such a peculiarly unsuccessful attempt, I was allowed to handle the matter on my own. The first time I saw Hugo Lutterworth was in a cell in Worsfield Jail, a small Victorian prison with no proper interviewing facilities. He was a fine-featured young man with an aureole of fair hair, so that he looked like Sir Galahad or Lancelot or any of the rather over-sensitive chaps from the Table Round in a pre-Raphaelite painting. Mr. Driscoll asked me what I thought the chances of conviction were, bearing in mind that the evidence clearly showed that the brakes in Captain Gleason's Volvo estate had been tampered with. What I thought was that even if the prosecution were conducted by a first-year law student with a serious speech impediment, we were likely to be defeated. What I said was, "I think we face certain difficulties." "You and Captain Gleason," I asked Lutterworth, "were partners in the garden centre business?" "I drew up the partnership agreement." Driscoll was fumbling among his papers, happy to be back in a branch of the law he understood. I think I've got it here." Never mind about that now, Mr. Driscoll." I turned to Hugo to ask him the $4,000 question. And you were clearly having a bit of a walk-out with Gleason's wife. I don't want Amanda's name mentioned. The man was clearly keen on a place in a stained-glass window. Now, you may not, old darling, but the prosecution are going to mention it every 10 minutes. Listen, someone surely drained the fluid from the brakes in Gleason's car. There's no dispute about that. No dispute at all, Driscoll agreed. Well, what we want to know is, was that someone you? That was clearly a tactless question. Hugo turned from me to ask Mr. Driscoll if Amanda Gleason was all right. No one tampered with her brakes, I was able to reassure him. She hasn't been questioned, has she? Not arrested? There's no statement from Mrs. Gleason among the prosecution documents. They're not going to arrest her? Well, not as far as we know. Well, can't we find out? I suppose Mr. Driscoll could have a word with the prosecution solicitor, I suggested, just in an idle chat on the phone. Couldn't you, Driscoll, see if there's any intention of proceeding against Mrs. Gleason for any offence? I can't decide anything until I know about Amanda, Hugo Lutterworth told us, and I wondered, idly but aloud, what offence he thought she might be charged with. I'd rather not say anything. My client looked nobly resolute. Not till I'm sure Amanda's safe. Do you understand? No, Mr. Lutterworth. I was beginning to lose patience with all this nobility. I'm not at all sure that I do understand. This isn't gardener's question time, you know. I didn't come all this way for a nice chat about the herbaceous border. We are here to discuss matters of life and death. And then he gave me an answer which struck a kind of chill into the air of the over-centrally heated cell. Gardening is really a matter of life and death, he told us. Things either do well, or you just have to pull them up and throw them on the bonfire. There's no room for mercy in gardening. When we left our client, he was going to consider taking us into his confidence once he had established that his precious Amanda Gleason was in the clear. But I thought that if he talked as ruthlessly about Captain Gleason's accident as he had about gardening, I might be saying good-bye to Sir Lancelot for about 5 years. When we were in Worsfield, I asked Mr. Driscoll to show me the scene of the crime. The garden centre was surprisingly large and seemed well cared for. The slope in front of the gates was fairly steep and led down to the busy junction where heavy lorries were frequently passing. My instructing solicitor took in all these facts and said, It's so out of Lutterworth's character. Oh, know him well, do you? Oh, for years, yes. And his father, too. You know, I always thought Hugo was almost painfully honest. That's why he needed a bit of protection in the partnership agreement. Well, old Sir Lancelot was probably pretty honest, I told him, until he started messing around with Queen Guinevere. I suppose if Hugo gets sent away, Gleason will have to sell this place. We'd wandered into the gates of the garden centre and were standing in the cheap and cheerful shrub department. One of those horrible great supermarkets has been after this site for years. Hugo was dead against selling. He'd built up the business, really, and he lived for his flowers. I say, no, we'd better go. This is rather embarrassing. Mr. Driscoll was looking out toward the hardy perennials. I saw an elderly, ill-tempered-looking man walking with a stick. Beside him was a red-haired beauty, pale and with that rather self-conscious air of spirituality which makes pre-Raphaelite pictures so irritating. She walked with her arm in his. Queen Guinevere was making a fuss of King Arnold. Domestic harmony seemed to have been restored. But I'm running ahead of myself. My pre-trial visit to Worsfield jail occurred after my separation from Mrs. Horace Rumpole. I had walked away from the taxi across the park with a lightness of step and a curious feeling of elation which I hadn't felt perhaps since the jury brought in their not guilty verdict in the Penge bungalow murders. As I walked past the sleeping pelicans and towards Big Ben and shivered slightly in the night air, I began to consider the question of lodgings for the night. At first, in my enthusiasm, I considered the Savoy. but I soon remembered that very few people are able to stay at that inn on legal aid. So I turned my footsteps towards what I now regarded as my real home, Equity Court in the Temple, London, EC 4. I had no doubt that my separation from Hilda was then permanent. What is a man, after all, but his old jokes? And to be matched with a wife who spurned them seemed to me a fate considerably worse than death. As I walked, I repeated some lines by Percy Bysshe Shelley, not for some reason known to Sir Arthur Quiller Couch or included in my old India paper edition of the Oxford Book of English Verse. Rather an irritating young man in many ways, Percy Bysshe, and unable to hold a candle to the great Wordsworth. But he had some pretty telling phrases on the subject of marriage, the beaten road, he called it, which those poor slaves with weary footsteps tread, who travel to their home among the dead by the broad highway of the world, and so, with one chained friend, perhaps a jealous foe, the dreariest and the longest journey go. My own journey was to freedom and Equity Court. And then I remembered a few minor drawbacks about the place. Our head of chambers, Soapy Sam Ballard, Q.C., was intent on declaring the place a smoke-free zone, banning all cheroots, panatellas, whiffs, and fags, so that our chamber might, as he put it, stand shoulder to shoulder with the Clean Air Brigade. He was also constantly reminding us that the lease specified that our home from home should be used for business purposes only, and not for any form of domestic life. A fellow named Geoffrey Mungo had recently been evicted from his chambers in Lincoln's Inn for using them as a bed-sitter. Despite this terrible warning, I thought I could probably settle fairly comfortably into my room at Equity Court, and Ballard would be none the wiser. It cannot be said, however, that the suspicions of our head of chambers were not aroused. At the next chambers meeting, when we assembled to discuss the vital question of the hour, Diane's request for a rise in salary to keep up with the increased cost of nail varnish and women's magazines, or the escalating consumption of Nescafé, Ballard's desk was littered with a number of exhibits. Item 1, a yellowish shaving brush, still damp. Item 2, 1 tub of shaving soap. Item 3, 1 safety razor, Gillette, and a slightly rusted blade. As those present gazed upon these articles in some bewilderment, Ballard opened the proceedings on a solemn note. "Standards in chambers," he told us, "must be kept up. We must give the impression of a tight and happy ship to the solicitors who visit us." "Aye, aye, Captain," I felt it was appropriate to mutter. "I was hearing of a set in Lincoln's Inn, where they had trouble with a tenant cooking in his room." Ballard ignored my interruption, and then Uncle Tom, T.C. Rowley, our oldest and briefless inhabitant, gave us a passage from his memoirs. "Old Maurice Mackay had a pupil from Persia, I recollect. This fellow gave a birthday party and roasted half a sheep in the middle of Maurice's Turkey carpet." Whereupon Ballard, feeling perhaps that the case might be diverted into other channels, called our attention to the exhibits. "These things," he glanced at them with distaste, "were found in the upstairs lavatory where the cleaning lady arrived this morning. The discovery was immediately reported to our clerk Henry, who took them into his custody. Does anyone lay claim to them? They seem to be articles of antique shaving tackle." "Well, they're certainly not mine," Portia assured us. "Of course, they didn't have takeaway dinners in those days," Uncle Tom was rambling on. "He ended up as a prime minister somewhere." "Who did?" Urskin Brown asked. "Oh, Maurice Mackay's pupil, the one who cooked the sheep." "Rumpole." Ballard reasserted his command. "Do you know anything about these objects?" "Oh, I never plead guilty, my lord. Sorry I can't join in the fun. Got to get down to a little place in the country." I rose to leave the meeting. "Your weekend cottage, Rumpole?" Uncle Tom asked. "No, Worsfield Jail. I had been summoned to a second conference with Hugo Lutterworth, who had, it seemed, something to impart. Mr. Driscoll had been assured there was no prosecution of Mrs. Amanda Gleason intended, but she had, a fact we didn't know at the time, visited Lutterworth in prison. When I called on him, he immediately told me that he had no further need of my services. As you can see, it was not a period of unmitigated success in the Rumpole career. "You're giving me the sack!" I couldn't help it. My spirits were a little dashed. "It's just I don't see what you can do for me. It was my fault, you see, entirely my fault. I know that perfectly well." "Couldn't you think of me as an endangered species?" "What?" Lutterworth was puzzled. "Avocatus minimus volubilis, the lesser booming barrister," I said. I lit a comforting small cigar. "We're being flushed out of our natural habitats in Crown Courts and before the magistrates. Batty bureaucrats are going to take away our right to juries and shift the burden of proof and leave us defenceless. Soon we'll be replaced by a couple of chartered accountants and a good computer. If you care for conservation at all, Mr. Lutterworth, help save the barrister." My client looked seriously concerned. Not much of a sense of humour in Sir Launcelot. "Look, do one thing for me. Let me cross-examine the prosecution witnesses. Let's just see if they've got a case." "No harm in that, Hugo," Mr. Driscoll advised him. "Oh, all right." Hugo Lutterworth thought it over and appeared to be prepared to do something to save the Rumpole from extinction. "But I can't go into the witness box and give evidence. I can't say anything that might implicate Amanda. So I would be fighting a hopeless battle with one hand tied behind my back. Things did not go entirely smoothly either in my stay at Equity Court. I had settled down moderately comfortably, and much to my surprise there was no message or telephone call from Mrs. Hilda Rumpole, and I certainly did not lift the telephone to her. Well, I had little enough time on my hands, what with visits to Worsfield and fending off the unwelcome attentions of our head of chambers. Soapy Sam Ballard, strolling down Fetter Lane, happened to glance into the window of Sam Firkin's barber shop, where he saw Rumpole, well lathered, reclining in a chair and receiving the attention of Sam's cutthroat razor, to be followed by a hot towel and a dash of astringent lotion. From this glimpse he deduced, as Urskin Brown told me much later, that I must either be in funds to enjoy the luxury of having myself shaved, or, and this seemed to him the more likely explanation, I had lost my shaving tackle, when our cleaning lady, Mrs. Slammery, found it apparently abandoned in Chambers' upstairs lavatory. Resolved to make further inquiries, Ballard called late at Chambers, and was rewarded, again my informant is my learned friend Claude Urskin Brown, with a glimpse of a bedroom slipper, and above it a portion of flannel pyjama leg disappearing up a darkened stairway. He went in hot pursuit and beat on Rumpole's locked door, calling out my name repeatedly, but answer came there none. One morning he arrived at Chambers early, and asked Mrs. Slammery, who was sweeping the doorstep, if she had seen me, but she was unable to help in his inquiries. I then turned up, full of bacon and eggs from the tasty bite. "Rumpole," Ballard pounced on me. "What on earth are you doing?" "Arriving at work," I assured him, "as I have been these last 40 years. Not satisfied with this answer, he pursued me up to my room and began a minute examination of the broken-springed couch in the corner under the bookcase. "I see you make yourself quite at home here, Rumpole." He did his best to sound sarcastic. "A person could easily sleep on that old Chesterfield." "Yes, of course. Care for 40 winks?" "Filthy ashtray." He examined the object in question. "Well, Mrs. Slammery hasn't flipped her magic duster yet." "I think I'd better warn you, Rumpole. I'm proposing that Chambers becomes a smoke-free zone in accordance with present-day medical advice." "You're what?" I assumed surprise, although, of course, I had wind of Ballard's great plan from Urskin Brown. It's not enough to abstain oneself. It's the other fellow's poison getting up your nostrils. You want to ban smoking in chambers? I had to be sure of the prosecution case. That is my intention. You can't do that. I imagine the proposal will command pretty general support. It's entirely illegal. I peered back into the distant days at Keble, when I had been up on constitutional law in a nutshell. What? Ballard peered somewhat taken back. It would be against our ancient rights of freedom, those great principles of justice our fathers fought and bled for. It would be clean contrary to Magna Carta. I bow to your superior knowledge of history, Rumpole. Could you just remind me which clause in Magna Carta deals with smoking? No free man shall be taken or imprisoned, or destrained on, or exiled, or denied the comfort of the occasional cheroot, unless by the lawful judgment of his peers. I gave him the sonorous quotation he had asked for. I know you're remarkably ignorant of the common law of England, Ballard, however encyclopedic your knowledge of the rent laws and the factory acts. Ah, talking of which, of what? The factory acts. Do we have to? I think we do. These chambers, Rumpole, to which you are a comparative newcomer, I was at pains to remind him, are designated as a place of work. This is not a doss house. As your head, I am not in the business of running a hotel or some sort of Salvation Army hostel. What are you suggesting? I appeared not to follow his drift. I am simply suggesting that you've been living in here, Rumpole, sleeping rough. He darted to a cupboard and pulled the door open, finding nothing but a few books and an umbrella. Last night I saw a pyjama leg. I expect you did on retiring for the night. When I came in here, late after dining in hall with Mr. Justice Gwent Evans, I called into chambers and I distinctly saw a leg in pyjamas, beating a hasty retreat toward your room, Rumpole. He ended triumphantly, but I only looked at him in a sorrowful and pitying fashion. Oh, lay off it, Ballard, I said. It's a matter I intend to pursue for the benefit of the other tenants. Please, Ballard, lay off the booze. That's what I mean. Keep off the sauce. Cut down on the quaffing. I know what you benchers get up to at the high table in hall. No wonder you've started seeing things. Things? Now he was struggling to follow my drift. Pyjama legs now. I ostentatiously lit a small cigar. In a little while it'll be elephants. Pink mice crawling up the curtains. Look, why don't you lie down quietly, sleep it off before you go blundering across the road and make a complete pig's breakfast of a planning appeal? At this, Ballard coughed equally ostentatiously and moved toward the door. I am absolutely firm on my principles, he said. This is not the end of the inquiry. Remember Mungo. Mungo? I pretended ignorance of the Lincoln's Inn squatter. He tried to save money by moving into his chambers. He was found heating tins of spaghetti bolognese on the electric fire. Geoffrey Mungo has been given 3 months' notice to quit. Oh, cut down on the port, Ballard. I looked at him sadly. May you find the strength to kick the habit. I shall pray for you. So the first attack by our head of chambers was repelled. Some nights later I was seated at my desk by the roaring electric fire, as usual of an evening, dining on Chateau Fleet Street and a take-away curry, tastefully served on a silver paper dish from the Star of India halfway up Chancery Lane. I was reading the Oxford Book of English Verse, and had reached what, to my mind, is one of the old sheep of the Lake District's finest. A sonnet I really had no need to read, as I had its inspiring lines by heart. It is not to be thought of that the flood of Rumpole's freedom, which to the open sea of the world's praise from dark antiquity hath flowed, with pomp of waters unwithstood, should perish. Then there was a knock on the door. I hastily covered my Oriental dinner and the Oxford book with a brief, and Mrs. Phillida Urskin Brown marched in. She'd been working late and was wearing her glasses. "Ballard knows all about it," she said, coming to the point at once. "Ballard knows all about what?" Phillida lifted the statement of evidence and exposed my half-eaten dinner. "You eating these take-away curries in chambers." "Oh, how on earth—" "Oh, really, Rumpole. After nearly half a century of mixing with criminals, you might have picked up a few tips. At least don't leave the evidence scattered around your waste-paper basket. Mrs. Slammery's been finding Star of India placky bags around the place for days." "I don't see that proves a thing. Is there anything wrong with a fellow exhausted after a long case taking a mouthful of chicken bindaloo on his way home? Oh, but you're not, are you? Not what? Not on your way home." "Oh, perhaps not exactly." There was no doubt she had hit upon a weak spot in my defence, and our Portia was now staring at me over the top of her glasses, barking questions in the way I had long ago taught her to deal with a hostile witness. My lessons had clearly been well learnt. "What do you mean, not exactly? You're either on your way home or you're not. Or do you make a vague shot at Froxbury Court and sometimes miss?" Well, not exactly." "Oh, Rumpole, do try and answer the question." She sighed with that weary patience I often adopt in court. "I put it to you, you are living in chambers." "Well, not exactly living." "The Oxford Book of English Verse. Isn't it your regular bedside reading?" And when I merely shrugged my shoulders, she pressed the point home. "Why don't you answer? Are you afraid you might be incriminated?" "Well, I like a spot of Wordsworth before dropping off. Nothing wrong with that, is there, Portia?" "Nothing at all. So the Oxford Book of English Verse is to be found on your bedside table, in the Gloucester Road, "Yes, of course." At which she pulled another mean courtroom trick, rolled back the brief on my desk further, and revealed my favourite anthology. "Then what's it doing here?" "Rubbing shoulders with bloodstains I have known by Professor Ackerman, and an out-of-date Archbold on crime." "Well, I brought it here to prepare a final speech in a case." Quick thinking, you'll agree, but she was on to me like a terrier. "Which case?" "Which what?" "Case. Am I not speaking clearly?" "An attempted murder. My client's an excellent gardener and a remarkably unsuccessful murderer. I have to address the jury." "No, you haven't. That case doesn't start until next week." "How do you know?" "Because I am prosecuting." "The game's up, Rumpole." "All right, Gov. I was, I confess it, beaten. You got me banged to rights." "Oh, Rumpole, you know perfectly well criminals don't say that any more." At that she sat down, exhausted by her forensic brilliance, in my client's chair. "Well, a fellow is entitled to his own anecdotes, for God's sake," I started to explain. "I mean, where would I be without my anecdotes?" Hilda took exception to one of them. She guessed the terrible truth. "An excellent story. You remember I told it at the Scales of Justice dinner. Well, went down rather well, I thought." "Did you? And what did Hilda have to say about it?" "No, I prefer not to remember. I believe the word senile featured in her address to the court. I opened the cab door and found freedom." "You'll have to go back sometime." And she added thoughtfully, "Anyway, you can't stay here. After the Geoffrey Mungo case, Ballard will have you evicted for breaking the terms of the lease." "Mungo cooked spaghetti bolognese. Yes, and you import curry. I'd say the offence is a great deal worse." "They're on to you, Rumpole. Stay here another night and you'll lose your tenancy." She looked at me with a sort of amused desperation. "What are we going to do about you?" She sighed and made up her mind. "Oh, well, I suppose there's nothing else for it. Now, just until you find somewhere else, you understand?" So it came about that I took up residence in a spare bedroom in the Urskin Brown's agreeable house in Canonbury Square. I was, although I say it myself, no trouble at all to Claude and Phillida. For instance, I always did my own breakfast, manning the cooker to produce my own bacon, egg, and fried slice, while the family gloomily digested muesli, stuff which looked as though it were manufactured to line bird cages, and fat-free yogurt. In the evenings I entertained my hosts with an anthology of my best anecdotes, together with a complete account of my cross-examination of the pathologist in the Penge Bungalow murders, a triumph of which I have almost total recall. I must say that the Urskin Browns were kind and generous hosts. The same could not be said of their issue, children operatically named Tristan and Isolda. This couple of mere infants, no more than 9 and 7 years old respectively, were amazingly puritanical, and on the whole as censorious of Rumpole as Soapy Sam Ballard at his most disapproving. One morning I was at the cooker in a dressing-gown, smoking a small cigar and blowing out a slight fire caused by some leaping bacon fat on the grill. Portia was deep in a brief, and Urskin Brown had just had Opera magazine hot from the press, and the children were dressed for school, when Tristan said, after a prolonged and artificially exaggerated coughing fit, "I can't understand why people have to smoke." "I can't understand why people have to chew gobstoppers," I was quick with my reply. "I never chew gobstoppers. They're bad for your teeth." "For one so young, you seem remarkably careful of your health. Let me tell you, Tristan, and you too, Isolda, if you'd care to listen, there is no pleasure on earth that's worth sacrificing for the sake of an extra 5 years in the geriatric ward of the Sunset Old People's Home Western-super-Mare." "My teacher says they're going to make all smoking illegal," young Isolda announced. "They're going to send you to prison for it." I wondered if Portia had given birth to a couple of prosecuting counsel when the child continued, "My teacher says you shouldn't be allowed to smoke, even if you're all by yourself, sitting in the field, in the open air." "Why ever not?" "You might set fire to yourself with the matches. They'd have to cure your burns on the national health." Tristan supplied the answer with considerable satisfaction. Then Urskin Brown rose to take his infants off to school. As they left the room, Isolda made a remark to her father which caused the fried slice to turn somewhat sour in my mouth and make me feel but a temporary visitor to Islington. "Daddy," I heard her piping up, "how long is that man going to live here?" In search of an answer to the same question, I heard much later, Phillida visited She Who Must Be Obeyed in Froxbury Court. She found Hilda with her feet up in an unusually tidy flat, listening to the Archers, a programme which used to cause some controversy between us, and tried to effect a reconciliation. It seems she told Hilda that I was missing her greatly, whereupon my wife said that she was hardly missing me at all, and thanked Phillida for her courage in putting up with me. So much for the gratitude of a woman to whom I had continually returned home at a more or less regular hour from Pomeroy's wine bar for the last 40 years. No wonder I'd chosen freedom. A few nights before Regina versus Lutterworth started, I came home late from chambers and let myself in quietly, thinking Tristan and Isolda might have been mercifully asleep. The kitchen door was open a crack, and I thought I heard the sound of voices. Phillida and Claude were no doubt sampling a rather cheeky little Bergerac he had got in a job lot from an old school friend in the wine trade. I paused by the door and heard Phillida say, "You've got to talk to him, Claude. She doesn't want him back. He might be with us forever." "Well, you invited him to stay. You ought to talk to him." Claude Urskin Brown was showing his usual courage. "Oh, go on, Philly. Be a man." "I am not a man," Phillida said, and there was clearly force in her argument. "You're the man, remember." A fellow can't help feeling a bit of a pang when he hears he's not a welcome guest in the house of a lady to whom he's taught all she ever knew of the subject of cross-examination. And I trod the cold stairway up to bed, a little sadly. So I was still a wanderer, with a temporary billet à côte de chez Urskin Brown, when our Portia rose to open the case of Regina versus Lutterworth to the jury. "It's the old story," she told them. "A young and attractive wife married to an elderly husband who had perhaps lost some of his charm for her over the years. So she allowed herself to drift into a love affair with her husband's partner, that no doubt physically more attractive young man, Hugo Lutterworth, the defendant in this case. Lutterworth is here today because he was not content with mere sex. He wanted his partner, Captain Gleason, out of the way so that he could enjoy his business and his wife without having to share them with anybody. Members of the jury, it's difficult for us, who no doubt have stable homes and contented marriages, to understand the lengths to which some unhappy people will go in inflicting pain and suffering on others." Mrs. Urskin Brown, Q.C., was no doubt at her most eloquent. But I wasn't listening to her. I was gazing in fascinated horror at the bench above me. There, chosen to preside over the court, was the Welsh wizard, Mr. Justice Hugh Gwent Evans, the chapel guru who had failed to laugh at my joke in the Savoy Hotel, and there beside him, equally unamused, sat she who must be obeyed, my wife Hilda, staring down at me, apparently prepared to judge Rumpole come to an unfavourable verdict and impose the severest penalty known to the law. Among Phillida Urskin Brown's early witnesses was a garden centre worker named Daphne Hapgood, a chunky, red-headed young daughter of the soil, whose nails were broken with much potting up. She testified to having seen Hugo Lutterworth bestowing a passionate kiss on Mrs. Gleason in a greenhouse. People who live in glasshouses shouldn't kiss their employers' wives. Evidence which shocked the judge, and she who must be obeyed, equally. She also described seeing Lutterworth doing some work on the Volvo estate, bending over it with the bonnet open on the day before it crashed. She added that it was not unusual for Hugo to work on the cars, being apparently as handy with sparking plugs as he was with seedlings. Through all this evidence I noticed that Amanda Gleason couldn't resist looking distressed and lovingly at Hugo in the dock, bestowing upon him long glances, which he, unfortunately, returned in a way which was doing us no good at all with the jury. "Did you ever hear Captain Gleason ask Hugo Lutterworth to look at his car for him?" I asked Daphne when I rose to cross-examine. "I can't remember. He may have done." "May have done on this particular occasion?" "I suppose it is possible." "Thank you." "Is that all, Mr. Rumpole?" The judge seemed surprised. "You're not challenging the evidence about the intimate conduct between your client and his partner's wife?" "Oh, no, my lord," I said. "That's admitted." "So this man," the Welsh wizard was working himself up to a denunciation from the pulpit, "admits kissing Mrs. Gleason in full view of the garden centre workforce. He seems to have had a very tenuous grasp on morality." "This judge," I whispered to Mr. Driscoll, "is suffering from a bad case of premature adjudication." "Did you say something, Mr. Rumpole?" His lordship was looking at me suspiciously, and I could see that my lady wife was not too pleased either. "In due course there will be a full explanation," I told him. I hoped there would, but at the minute I had no particular idea what it was going to be. Happily, the moment for luncheon had arrived, and the judge, showing that he had remembered more of my well-known anecdote than he cared to admit, said, "Very well, members of the jury, we'll leave it there until 2:10, my lord," I suggested. At which Sir Hugh Gwent Evans rose without another word, and, ignoring my signal, she who must be obeyed swept out after him. Later, after I had hung about for a while in the marble-paved hallway of the Worsfield Court, I saw Hilda advancing upon me in the company of Posnet, the judge's clerk. "Hilda!" I found myself for once in my life almost at a loss for words. "What on earth—" The judge invited me down to luncheon and to hear a bit of your case, Rumpole. You may remember how well I got on with Mr. Justice Gwent Evans at the Savoy. Of course, judges did ask distinguished visitors down to lunch in their lodgings, and they did ask such people, sheriffs, lords lieutenant of the county and their good ladies, persons of that ilk, to sit beside them on the bench during particularly fascinating cases. But persons of the ilk of she who must be obeyed? I suppose I found it hard to believe that the judge had taken such a shine to her. Well, you might have let me know, I said. It came as something of a shock to me, seeing you in the seat of judgment. How could I let you know, Rumpole? I keep looking around the flat, and you're nowhere to be found. The judge is just coming, Mrs. Rumpole, the clerk said, and started to withdraw from the presence. Oh, thank you, Posnet. I'll be waiting here. That's Posnet, the judge's clerk, quite a sweetie, she explained to me, as though I were a child in matters concerning the legal profession. And then she said, Oh, by the way, that case of yours, have you noticed the way Mrs. Gleason keeps looking at your client? Quite an exhibition, isn't it? Don't you think she's really making it too obvious? The scarlet judge appeared, with his clerk Posnet in attendance, and she was spirited off with them into the municipal Daimler to lunch in his lodgings. But what had happened was something of a miracle, a bit of a turn-up for the book. What she had said had given me an entirely new view of the case. In fact, she had come up with some sort of a legal inspiration. I went off in search of Driscoll and asked to see the original partnership agreement which came into existence when Gleason and Lutterworth got together to buy the Woodland Folk Garden Centre. Hilda didn't return to court in the afternoon and took no further part in the case. We heard evidence about the brakes on the Volvo estate car having been cut, and when I suggested that it was a strange criminal who left such clear evidence of his crime, the judge went so far as to suggest that the criminal clearly expected the runaway car to be smashed up by a passing lorry on the main road, so that the damage might have been obscured in the resulting mess. Whatever friends I had in the world, they clearly did not include Mr. Justice Gwent Evans. An officer then gave evidence that Hugo's fingerprints had been found near the area of the braking system. I managed to slip in a request for further investigations to see if the prints of anyone else who was connected with the garden centre could be found, and counsel for the prosecution agreed readily. No doubt Phillida wanted to accommodate me so that I would move out of her matrimonial home. When I got back to chambers, I found a small handbill on my tray, which was the only message I had, and went to my room to bone up on the laws of partnership. Before I got down to work, I read the handbill, which ran, as I remember, something as follows. Lawyers as Christians. The suffragan Bishop of Sidcup will give an address on the Christian approach to the Rent Acts. Everyone interested cordially invited. Sherry and sandwiches will be served after the discussion. Samuel Ballard, Q.C., President. Something about the connection between Soapy Sam Bollard and Sherry had put a thought in my head. And then the door opened and Urskin Brown was upon me. I wanted to have a word with you. He perched uncomfortably on the arm of my client's chair. Philly's idea, really. A short word. I'm studying the laws of partnership in depth. Oh, of course, it has been tremendous fun having you to stay with us for a short while, just till you get fixed up. Oh, enjoyed some of the old stories, eh? I lit a small cigar. Better than watching television. Oh, I got plenty of them for the long winter evenings. Oh, good. Urskin Brown sounded unenthusiastic. Oh, yes, Philly and I would love that. Well, then, there. Does that solve your problem? Our problem, yes, but, not Hilda's. Hilda's? Philly went to see her. She's most terribly upset. Your wife's upset? I was puzzled. She seemed quite bobbish in court. No. Hilda's, well, terribly down and lonely, Rumpole. She wants you back desperately, Rumpole. We were both, well, rather sad about it. I looked pityingly at Urskin Brown. Then I got up and slapped him heartily on the back. Claude, I have good news for you. You're going back to Hilda? The man appeared to have some hope. No, no, set your mind at rest. Hilda's bright as a button, happy as the day's long. She's chummed up with a particularly nauseating brand of Welsh judge, and she's having an exotic social life round the Worsfield Assizes. She wanted me to tell you that she's enormously grateful to you and Portia for having me, and long may the arrangement continue. Now, is that good news for you? Urskin Brown didn't answer. It isn't, is it? Urskin Brown still didn't answer. In fact, it somewhat dashed your hopes. You really want to give me the Order of the Imperial Elbow, don't you? No, say no more. I can take a hint, Urskin Brown. I can tell when your children simulate terminal bronchitis every time I walk into a room that it's time I was moving on. Only one thing. You'll have to help me to find another billet. Well, how am I expected to do that? The poor fellow asked weakly. Let me tell you, old cock, I said. It's perfectly simple. All you have to do is to go to this shindig. I let him have the handbill for nothing. The Bishop of Sidcup on the Christian approach to the Rent Acts. Oh, but that night I've got tickets for Rigoletto, he protested. Rigoletto will still be around in 100 years' time, I assured him. This is your one opportunity to hear the Bishop of Sidcup on this fascinating subject. Roll up, Claude. Be among those present on the night. Join Soapy Sam Bollard, our slithery head of chambers, and partake liberally of the sherry and sandwiches, particularly the sherry. Why on earth should I? Because if you do this properly, old darling, I can fold my tent, take the Golden Road back to Chambers, and stay here undisturbed. Now, this is all I'm asking you to do. And I began to fill him in with the details of my plan. The next day, Captain Gleason went into the witness box, a bulky figure in a double-breasted blue suit and a regimental tie. He seemed such an unlikely consort for the beautiful redhead in the well of the court that it came as no surprise when she hardly looked at him. Phillida was winding to the end of her examination-in-chief when she asked the captain when he became doubtful about his wife's relationship with Hugo Lutterworth. Well, I'd been suspicious of my wife and Hugo some time, he said. About a year ago, I came back from a regimental dinner in London, discovered them in a compromising position. Gleason spoke quietly, sounding the most forbearing husband. I decided to forgive them both. Oh, of course, I had no idea my partner would try to get rid of me. We have heard evidence that your wife visited Lutterworth in prison. Yes, I heard that, yes. The captain shook his head sadly. In spite of that, what is your present attitude toward your marriage? Oh, I'm still prepared to give it another chance. In spite of an attempt that may have been made on your life? Oh, yes, in spite of that. You could almost hear the purr of approval from the jury as Phillida thanked him and sat down. The judge added his thanks, and then the captain asked if he might sit during my questions, as he had a little heart trouble. Of course, Captain Gleason, the Welsh judge cooed at him. A glass of water, usher, bring Captain Gleason a glass of water. Now, are you sure you feel quite well, Captain Gleason? You just sit there and take it quite easily. You won't be long, will you, Mr. Rumpole? Not very long, my lord, and I'll try to adopt my best bedside manner. I turned to Gleason and started quietly. Captain Gleason, did my client Hugo Lutterworth look after the cars from time to time? He did, yes. If they needed a service or some adjustment, used he to do it? Well, he said he didn't trust garages. The day before, well, let's use a neutral expression and call it the accident. Had you told him your estate car wasn't running very smoothly and asked him to have a look at it? Can't remember. Oh, can you not? I spoke more crisply with a little vinegar in the honey. Did Mr. Lutterworth tell you he'd adjusted the points or the plugs, something of that nature? Yeah, well, he may have done. The answer came after a pause. So you may have asked him to look at your car. It's possible. I haven't got much of a talent with mechanical objects. Captain Gleason smiled at the judge, who smiled back in a thoroughly understanding manner. Clearly they were both useless when it came to carburetors. You weren't in Army transport? No. You were in the catering corps? Well, what about it? The witness sounded defensive. Oh, nothing at all. I'm sure you were a very gallant caterer. So you were never attended to your car yourself? Never. The evidence was, happily, quite positive. Never even opened the bonnet? No, never. I got it filled up at the garage. And Hugo Lutterworth did the rest? Did rather too much on that particular occasion. There was an unsettling rattle of sympathetic laughter from the jury, in which his lordship was pleased to join. I wiped the smile off his face when I asked, "Oh, you say that, Captain Gleason? But looking back on it, wouldn't you agree that my client had done you a simply enormous favour?" No idea what you mean. Gleason appeared startled and looked to the judge for help. Neither have I, Mr. Rumpole. The judge seemed all too willing to come to the witness's aid. You know exactly what I mean, Captain. Had you not had a very tempting offer for the garden centre site from a chain of immense supermarkets? Might not your greenhouses have become promenades for the purchase of everything from butterscotch to bedsteads? My lord, I can't see how my business affairs can possibly be relevant. Oh, neither can I at the moment. Mrs. Urskin Brown, do you object to the question? No, my lord, not at this stage. Thank you, Portia. I'll be moving out soon. I rewarded her with a whisper. Well, Captain Gleason? We have had an offer for the site, yes, he answered with the utmost caution. And Mr. Lutterworth was determined not to sell. Yeah, that's what he said. Because he believes in flowers and badgers and butterflies and woodland folk, all that sort of thing. But you wanted to sell and make a thumping great profit. I was in favour of the Arcadia Stores offer, yes. The captain was still being very cautious. Captain Gleason, I would like the court to see the partnership agreement between yourself and my client. Driscoll handed copies of the agreement to the usher, who started distributing them to the judge, jury, and the witness. Mr. Rumpole, how can that possibly be relevant to the charge? His lordship was displeased, and I started to launch into a legal argument which I had prepared with the aid of Mr. Driscoll, who knew about partnership agreements. It goes right to the heart of the matter, my lord. It is the simple solution to what your lordship and the jury may have found an extremely puzzling case. Oh, well, I can't speak for the jury, of course, but I haven't found it in the least puzzling. Not puzzling? I did my best to sound extremely surprised. An alleged criminal who does everything in the presence of witnesses? A case of attempted murder which is so bungled that the victim suffers nothing but a few minor cuts and bruises? I should have thought that that might have caused a certain amount of bewilderment even to your lordship. The judge struggled with his irritation and suppressed it. Then he asked, "Why do you say I should look at this document?" "Because I understand my learned friend has no objection." Once again I whispered my bribe to Phillida. "I'll be out of your place by Thursday." My lord, we wouldn't wish to shut out any document which might possibly have some relevance." She rose, I might say, splendidly to the occasion. "Look at it, will you?" I asked the witness before the judge could draw another breath. "The jury have their copies." Whereas... No, skip all that waffle. Just look at paragraph 12. Read it out, will you? If either of the said partners shall perform an act which is prejudicial to the interests of the partnership, or shall be convicted of a criminal offence, Gleason started to read as quietly as possible, or shall be convicted of a criminal offence. I gave the court the sentence at full volume. All his rights in the partnership property and income and all other benefits due to him from the said partnership shall revert immediately to the other partner, who shall, from the date of the said act or offence, be solely entitled to all the partnership assets. I lowered the agreement and looked at the witness, smiling. Congratulations. You've done extremely well out of this little case, haven't you, Captain Gleason? I take the greatest exception to that. The captain rose to attention and almost shouted. He seemed to have momentarily recovered his health. Do you? I hope I sounded mildly surprised. All you had to do was crash your car into the bird baths. Get a few superficial cuts and bruises, and you became solely entitled to the Woodland Folk Garden Centre, which you could then flog to the supermarket and make yourself a fortune. Mr. Rumpole, that isn't all he had to do. A remarkable display of judicial bad temper was brewing up on the bench. Oh, I'm grateful to your lordship. I tried to pour oil on the troubled judge. Your lordship has got my point, of course. There was one other thing you had to do, wasn't there, Captain Gleason? You had to get the unfortunate Hugo Lutterworth convicted of a crime. But after that little formality, once the jury came back and found my client guilty of attempted murder, you'd be laughing all your way to your newly bought holiday home on the Costa del Sol. There was a decided change in the atmosphere in court. The jury were looking with interest and some suspicion at Captain Gleason. Even the judge was silent. Mrs. Gleason was now looking at her husband with some anxiety, and my client was beginning to look less blissfully unconcerned. I haven't got a house on the Costa del Sol, was the only answer the captain could manage. Oh, I'm sorry. Formentera it is it? Oh, no matter. I still congratulate you. You've come into a fortune. Captain Gleason looked helplessly down at the partnership agreement. I don't know how that clause got in there. Oh, let me tell you. My client's solicitor, Mr. Driscoll, here, drew up the agreement. He didn't altogether trust you, did he? I don't know what it was. Some rumours about how you came to leave the army. A story about the accounts when you were secretary to a golf club in Surrey. He put that in to protect Mr. Lutterworth, and you remembered it when you wanted to get rid of him. Isn't that the truth, Captain Gleason? My lord, Mr. Rumpole is attacking my client's character. Phillida threw self-interest to the winds and objected at last. Attack his character, I protested. God forbid. I am sure the captain is as honest a man as ever perverted the course of justice. Mr. Rumpole, will you please make your suggestion against the witness absolutely clear? The judge was still no Rumpole fan. With the greatest of pleasure. I turned to the witness. You needed a way to get Lutterworth out of the partnership. I suspect your wife also wanted to get rid of him. They'd had a brief affair, but that was all over, at least as far as she was concerned. There was a sound behind me, my client calling out some sort of protest, but I was doing too well to bother about Sir Lancelot's romantic susceptibilities. And you knew the terms of the partnership agreement. All you had to do was to stage the attempted murder of yourself and make it look as though Mr. Lutterworth had done it. So you asked him to look at the points in your car. He'd done that often enough before, hadn't he, without trying to kill you? I told you he'd done it before, yes. Captain Gleason was swaying slightly, and his speech was less clear. Mr. Rumpole, aren't you forgetting something? It was his lordship's last stand on behalf of the witness. Oh, am I, my lord? Remind me. Someone cut this gentleman's brake cables. Of course. You did that, Captain Gleason, didn't you? Ah, yes. and risk killing myself." The captain was trying to laugh. It was a somewhat grisly sound. "Oh, not much of a risk, was it? A short run down the drive and a crash into the statuary. No real risk for a driver who knew exactly what had happened to his brakes." There was a long silence, but answer came there none. At last Captain Gleason swayed, and fell crumpled at the side of the witness box. Amanda cried out and ran to kneel beside him. Queen Guinevere was showing her unaccountable love for the crotchety and dishonest old King Arnold. The court clerk and a police officer were opening Gleason's collar. "We'll adjourn now." The judge decided to leave the field of battle. Mr. Driscoll, a kindly fellow, was looking across at the fallen witness. "Is he all right?" "Oh, I think the captain will survive," I reassured him. "He's survived most things." After that cross-examination, the case was downhill all the way. Further investigation revealed Captain Gleason's prints on the brake cables. He was an incompetent crook. But then, the ones with any talent rarely come our way. Hugo Lutterworth would clearly never forgive me for my revelations, but he agreed to give evidence and was finally acquitted. There was still one other matter which I had to bring to a successful conclusion. Claude Urskin Brown, no doubt driven by a longing to clear Rumpole from his domestic hearth, did his work well. At the Lawyers as Christians meeting, he saw Ballard was suitably plied with sherry. Indeed, after the first 2 or 3, Soapy Sam appeared to be cooperating with enthusiasm. And when they finally emerged into the Temple car park, the Bollard walk was not altogether steady, nor his speech entirely clear. I have done my best to reconstruct their dialogue from what Claude told me later, but it seems to have gone somewhat as follows. "The thing about the Bishop of Sidcup," Ballard spoke with resonant emphasis, "is that he knows exactly where he stands." Already our head of chambers was fumbling for his car keys, preparing to motor home. "Yes, but do you," Claude asked, "what?" "Know where you stand?" "A bit unsteadily, if you ask my opinion. I mean," he looked suspiciously at Ballard's sleek black Granada, "you're not going to drive that thing, are you?" "Of course I am. Back to Waltham Cross." "How many sherries did you have, Ballard?"
3. No more than 3, Urskin Brown."
"Half a dozen at least. Way over the limit. I mean, do get in and drive, but if ever you want to be a judge—"
"What?"
A Bollard nerve had been touched. Of course he wanted to be a judge. "Drunk driving. The Lord Chancellor's going to cross you off his list of possibles." And in front of the Waltham Cross magistrates, fellow in Arbuthnot's chambers was telling me it's automatic prison on a breathalyzer, a month inside. Stamp out this menace. You know the sort of thing you get from a bench of teetotalers.
But I've missed the 11:15.
Ballard looked at his watch.
"I don't think there's another. Oh, Urskin Brown, what am I going to do?"
"Well, it's entirely up to you. Waltham Cross, eh? Oh, I'm afraid it's not on my route." Urskin Brown moved towards his own motor. "Good night, Ballard." Fate, for once, was on my side. Ballard consulted his wallet and found that he'd forgotten to go to the bank, and had indeed left his cheque-book at home. He called out to Claude for a loan to pay a minicab, but my trusty ally had switched on his engine and was roaring out of the car park. Ballard put his car keys in his pocket and walked sadly off in the general direction of Chambers. And there I found him the next morning. In fact, I took him up a cup of tea as he awoke, shivering slightly under an overcoat on a sofa in a corner of his room. "Morning, Ballard," I greeted him. "Been sleeping rough?" I sat down on a chair which also contained his trousers. "Kipping on the couch reserved for the clientele? What do you think this place is, the Sally Ann? I mean, what would the chaps think if they knew you were using our chambers as a common boarding-house?" Ballard sat up, took the teacup and raised it to his lips. And then he said,
You're not going to tell them?"
It's my clear and definite professional duty to do so. I can be remorseless on occasion. This is not living accommodation. You're in breach of the terms of our lease. What happened, old darling? Mrs. Ballard had enough of you?
There is no Mrs. Ballard.
No, I don't suppose there is. Silence reigned while Ballard took another sip of tea.
Rumpole,
he said.
I've been thinking.
Oh, don't overdo it.
I have been thinking.
He sounded judicial.
It might be better if we approached the question of smoking in chambers on a purely voluntary basis.
Ah, well, now you're talking.
I mean, you were able to point out to me the provisions of the Magna Carta.
Oh, and the European Convention on Human Rights.
Oh, what's that got to say about it?
He frowned. No citizen shall be persecuted on the grounds of race, creed, or colour, or because he lights up occasionally.
Ah, well, yes, you may be right. So, having given the matter my mature consideration—
Oh, and I am sure no consideration could be more mature than yours.
We needn't put smoking on the agenda for our next meeting. In view of that, it may not be necessary for you to mention the question of any person
dossing down in chambers.
Yes, exactly. I'm sure we understand each other.
I got up and moved to the door. Of course. That's what I admire about you, Ballard. You're absolutely firm on your principles. Oh, I hear the Bishop of Sidcup was a most tremendous hit. So I left him, still sipping thoughtfully. All that day I pondered on the simple observation by she who must be obeyed, which had put me onto the truth of Regina versus Lutterworth. In the evening, believing that Diane, our tireless typist, had really no further use for the geranium I had bought her from the Woodland Folk Garden Centre, I took it home to Froxbury Court, where I found Hilda comfortably ensconced and listening to the archers. We won the case, you know, I told her, after a pause, during which she looked not at all overjoyed by my return.
Well, so you should have.
I said we won it, Hilda. You gave me the idea. I mean, you found the bull point, the way the girl looked at him.
Oh, I'm not Daddy's daughter for nothing.
Daddy had 45 years at the bar. Dear old C.H. Whiston knew nothing about bloodstains, but let that pass.
Daddy knew a good deal about human nature.
Yes, well, all the same, I've got to give you the credit for our victory.
What are you doing here, Rumpole?
She looked at me doubtfully. Doing here? I came to give you a geranium. Hope you like it. It was then I presented the plant. I can't say it was received with undiminished rapture.
It looks as though it's seen better days.
Oh, well, that happens to all of us. Anyway, I live here, don't I?
Oh, do you? I haven't noticed you living here lately.
Oh, well, I expect you've been busy sweeping under beds, listening to everyday stories of country folk. That's what I've been doing, too, come to think of it.
Well, you can't just come and go as you please.
Do you think I'm running a hotel? I suggested a thought for her speech.
How did you know I was going to say that?
Oh, most people do. Look, let me pour you a G&T. Celebrate your great victory in court. Not every day you win a case, Hilda. I found the bottles and mixed a drink for her, taking the liberty of opening a bottle of Pomeroy's Ordinary for myself.
Daddy once won a case, Hilda said thoughtfully as she raised her glass. Extraordinary. What did you say?
Oh, I said nothing out of the ordinary.
When C.H. Whiston, when Daddy was a young man at the bar, he did a dock brief. He defended a pickpocket for nothing. Fellow who's accused of stealing a watch.
Oh, really? Hilda was embarking on an anecdote, one of her few, and very familiar.
Anyway, Daddy got the fellow off.
his first real success, and he was as pleased as Punch. And as he was leaving the old London sessions, this pickpocket came up to him and said, "I'm so grateful to you, Mr. Whiston. You saved me from prison, and I've got no money to pay you, but I can give you this." So what do you think the pickpocket did? I've no idea. Well, I can occasionally lie in a good cause. Offered Daddy the watch. She laughed and then stopped laughing and looked at me with deep suspicion. "You've heard it before." "No, Hilda, I promise you, never." "Oh, do take that poor plant out to the kitchen, offer it some water. It looks exhausted." And, of course, as ever, I obeyed her command.